In his new memoir, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recounts his conversation with former Disney CEO Bob Chapek over the Florida Parental Rights in Education bill, which activists labeled the Don't Say Gay bill. Now, DeSantis writes, as the controversy over the Parental Rights in Education bill was coming to a head, Chapek called me. He did not want Disney to get involved, but he was getting a lot of pressure to weigh in against the bill. Adding that Chapek told him, we get pressured all the time, but this time it's different. I haven't seen anything like this before.
According to a report from the New York Post, Chapek had privately expressed his hesitancy to involve his company in the political issues in Florida, the home of Disney World, but a pressure campaign within Disney and Democrats nationwide convinced him to take a stand. What do you make of this revelation, Robby?
So this is coming from DeSantis, obviously. So this is, one side of the story from a explicitly political actor, right, Governor DeSantis. So take that for what it's worth. But it rings true, certainly. I think there are a lot of CEOs, I think Chapek's not the only one, who don't actually want to get involved in cultural battles, but they're so afraid of activist pressure that they get involved and then they regret it. And maybe they're learning or they're realizing over time that they actually don't need to get involved, that the number of angry, the outraged activist people, it sounds like a lot of people because social media is kind of distortive in this way, has a distorting effect. But when actually the customers don't care very much. And in fact, you can risk alienating conservative customers by appearing to only care what liberal activists are telling you to care about.
Right. So there's actually another quote in the memoir that gets exactly to that. So let me read that. DeSantis also wrote in his memoir that, quote, if Disney stayed out of the politics, Disney would face 48 hours of outrage when the bill passed. When I sign it, you will get another 48 hours of outrage, mostly online. Then there will be some new outrage that the woke mob will focus on, and people will forget about this issue, especially considering the outrage is directed at a political media narrative, not the actual text of the legislation itself. So in other words, to DeSantis, the lesson of the Disney confrontation is an environment of, what he calls, quote, woke capital, old guard corporate republicanism is not up to the task at hand. What do you make of this quote?
I don't know about that. Well, look, there is a double-edged sword here because as much as I don't like some of the examples of corporations bowing to kind of liberal activists, I also think then Republicans can go too far the other way and then they're ordering corporations around and it's like, well, everybody's ordering corporations around. I mean, this has been a problem. It's a problem for social media companies. This is a problem for companies like Disney. I get that now everyone is trying to, it's like everything has to be mandatory or banned. And there's no just leave the companies alone to make the decisions they think are best, and if they're bad, then you don't have to be a customer anymore. And I don't think they should face undue pressure from liberal activists, and they should also not face pressure from Ron DeSantis. But we're very much moving away from this world, and I guess Ron DeSantis says this is not the times we're living in anymore. But of course, he comes from a small government libertarian perspective, a Tea Party perspective, and 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, probably would have said, yeah, no, it's totally we're not going to tell them what to do. Then what happened is that so many corporations started just explicitly listening to progressive activists, and Republicans decided they ought to do something about it. I don't know that was necessarily a smart decision in the long term or like a philosophically consistent one, but that's where the Republican Party is now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt uncomfortable with this feeling of that he's punishing political speech from a corporation. I mean, of course, on the left, we don't really necessarily believe corporations have rights the way that people do on the right. But, it did feel a little bit like, there was a potential First Amendment issue here. Now, I imagine what he would say to that is, there's so much woke stuff happening at the government level, and we never call that a First Amendment issue, right? When they, mandate all sorts of trainings and so forth, that correspond with the woke agenda that could fly in the face of somebody's First Amendment rights. I mean, I remember once having to take some sort of an online, certification, something I think from the state of New York that very much you had to ask you to affirm affirm certain things that I could easily see would fly in the face of somebody's religious beliefs, for example. And you have no choice. You have to click, yes, I affirm this, what have you. Certainly there are potential First Amendment violations and issues there as well. What I do think he is 100% correct on is that the media created the "don't say gay" narrative to smear him as homophobic, when in truth, what the bill really should have been called is, you can't talk to my kid about sex and your genitals until they have passed until they're 8 years old or older, right? Like that would be a much more accurate definition of that. And when you say it like that, which is what the actual text of the bill says, what reasonable person could object to that? I mean, there are some people who object to that, but that is definitely. I mean, he is right that in terms of where Americans, 70%, 75% of Americans are at on that issue, he has a mandate. And so, I think that's what when I keep thinking about DeSantis, what I want is for him to learn from President Trump's strengths and President Trump's weaknesses. I think President Trump's strength was he recognized that mandate, that there was a huge plurality of Americans who had been forgotten and erased and silenced. And he said, I'm going to speak for you. And whenever he does that, like when he showed up in East Palestine, that's why they see him as this tribune. Then when he's at his worst is when he's asking them to defend him, right? When he's asking them to take up his cause. These people stole everything from me. I need you to mobilize on my behalf. No, that's not your job. Is to represent them, not the other way around. And I see in DeSantis both impulses. On the one hand, wanting to speak up for the forgotten Americans, for the average Americans, normie people, right? But on the other hand, every once in a while, you do see it veer a little bit into, well, this has become his crusade, and now he's asking for sort of people to take up his cause. And I think that that's a really interesting distinction. And I'm sure it's going to come up in the election.
With the "don't say gay" bill, I definitely think the media exaggerated some aspects of it. I did recall, but maybe this wasn't in the final version of the bill. I can't quite remember. Maybe what level of, because yes, I agree that teachers don't need to talk to very young kids about controversial gender or sex topics that their parents don't want them talking to. Yeah, fine. But LGBT teenagers, I think, should be able to confide in their counselors at school if they feel like doing that. And that was my concern about the language, the reading of the bill. Look, ideally, everyone should just go to whatever school. I would support, again, school choice. I say this whenever we talk about these issues, that the child, their family, et cetera, can pick a good school that kind of matches their views or the experience they want to have, instead of just having the government decide the way it should be for all schools, which I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach is good. But I guess I would say I would certainly not prohibit public high schools from letting counselors talk to kids about sex and gender. I mean, that happens even in I went to Catholic school. There's still, you get the talk eventually, right? There is some level of discussion of these subjects that is not new or weird or progressive or verboten in my view, and I probably not in most families' views either. I mean,
to me, I think the language was, to the best of my recollection, the language focused on if the child starts to transition or change some aspect of their identity, if the teacher is calling them by a different name, that has to be treated like any other psychological or medical change, which right now by law it is mandated that the teachers inform the parents of any kind of medical intervention or anything like that. So to my recollection, the bill said this must be treated just like those things. And I would say to you, Robby, my question would be, what percentage of parents, when they send their kids to public school, are opting for a school that's going to keep it from them when everyone starts calling their child a different name? I imagine it is a small minority. And so to me, it seems almost like the default should be, you must tell the parents. And if there is a plurality of parents at a public school that decide, no, you know what, we're okay with a massive change happening to our child, we don't need to be informed about it, let them speak up and change things to suit them after that. Because to me, it seems like I'm not a parent, but it seems like the default for parents is, of course, if something major is happening to my child, if everyone in this school is calling my child by a different name, I must be informed of that. And I did my radar on this letter calling out the New York Times for its trans coverage by activists, staffers and employees and so forth. But, one of the articles that they were denouncing was this extremely liberal parent group, these parents, very, very liberal, totally on board with their child being trans, but not on board with not having been informed about it. And by the way, a lot of the kids in the article, I certainly remember one, I think it was more than one, were autistic. And so that has to be factored into it. It has to be factored into it. And on the smearing of DeSantis, I just want to bring up one other thing. I'm sure you guys talked about this last week, but Andrea Mitchell, in an interview with Kamala Harris, she asked, one of the questions she asked Vice President Harris was, what do you make of Ron DeSantis banning discussions of American history and slavery in the classroom, which is an outright falsehood. The Stop Woke Act actually mandates that school children be taught about racism and slavery. So in response, DeSantis' team said, forget it. We're not giving any interviews to MSNBC or any NBC affiliate until she apologizes, because in her question, she literally outright lied about what he was actually doing. And I just expect there to be a lot more of that because of what I said earlier, because of the mandate he represents. Like, if he was actually banning teaching slavery in schools, that would be great for Democrats, because that would be appalling and we would all get it, right? That's really terrible, because 95% of Americans, literally, that's an actual study, want slavery and racism taught to high school students. They have to lie about him to make it worth critiquing, because they know that the things he's doing are very popular, not just Republicans, but also with Democrats.
Again, going back to the Don't Say Gay bill, I would say if the student is publicly going by a different name, it seems very silly to it's public, it's known. It seems very silly to deliberately not inform parents of that. So I would agree with you on that. I guess if they privately speak to a counselor or something about a sex or gender issue, I don't think I would want the counselor to be immediately obligated to snitch to their parents. So for me, this calls for reflect, it would be different in different circumstances, and I would hope that most school employees are acting competently in the best interests of both the child and their families, and I would probably want to leave it to their discretion, because I don't think you could necessarily write a law that covers all of those two very different circumstances, which is that's why I'm skeptical of here's what all the schools should do, but because it can be a difficult thing to balance when you get into the teenage years. I think obviously I understand why parents don't want teachers or anyone introducing these concepts without their permission earlier on, but it's I don't know. I think there's some room for nuance on it. That does it for us for today. Tomorrow on Rising, News Nation's Brian Entin will join us to go over the latest in the Alex Murdaugh murder trial, which is not something we've covered yet on the show, but I know a lot of people have questions about it and people are interested, so we'll talk about that. Batya, it was wonderful having you with us.
Great to be with you, and I will be watching you all week.
Thank you. Well, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere podcasts are available. Take care, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.